director Dick Dale brings us Ribspreader, a 2022 Australian trashy splatterfest. Let's discuss. So Ribspreader is a kind of mix between going to a Gore concert and the early works of Peter Jackson and Troma films. So that should give you some idea of what to expect on this film. What's the story? Does it even matter? Well, let me give you the brief synopsis. It focuses on this guy called Bryan, who is an aging man who used to work for a cigarette company as kind of a mascot. And later on in life, he is down on his luck. And for reasons, he becomes effectively a slasher serial killer in this city, which is effectively like a nihilistic cesspool of humanity, where everyone is pretty much a murderer or some type of criminal, and he effectively becomes this kind of masked killer who goes around with buzzsaws and effectively rips open ribs and removes people's lungs. But he only targets those who smoke, and that's his kind of driving force. He attacks smokers. And we see a variety of different kind of interactions. So we might say he's kind of quasi-romance, this kind of prostitute, like a rival serial killer that he kind of crosses paths with, a couple of like punk girls that he has umbrage with. All sorts of things happen in this movie. There's lots of gore, lots of blood, lots of kind of like Gore style kind of depravity is the best way I would describe it. Let's talk about what worked in this film. This is a film which is not going to be for everyone, yeah? So you kind of know if you're going to like this by, do you like Gore, early Peter Jackson, or Troma movies? Now, I think this movie is definitely trying to ape the kind of style of Troma. Lloyd Kaufman even has a cameo role in this, and the early works of Peter Jackson. I don't think it's as charming as the early works of Peter Jackson. When we're talking things like Brain Dead, which is also known as Dead or Alive, and things like that, Meet the Feebles and such. To me, those films had a bit more of a charm with the characters, which this film is lacking. It certainly has the depravity and the over-the-top kind of nature of a, you know, trashy, bizarre horror comedy. And if you like that kind of surface level element to it, there's lots to enjoy here. It's obviously a lower budget film, but it certainly doesn't scrape on the kind of the VFX in regards to many kind of practical kind of gore shots, various kind of mutations, people getting killed in different ways, lots of kind of gross out kind of things happen, random little kind of side sequences that have like, you know, people randomly doing horrible things to each other. It is a full-on kind of like trash cinema, and it is proud of it. So it's very much a inventive film in many ways, very much kind of like aiming for that kind of like, I think it described itself as a kind of like a punk rock movie in some ways, and I can see that the reason why that is said. So if you like just, I mean, I see a lot of people who watch different films on YouTube and stuff, and if it's got lots of kind of like kills, lots of gore, and lots of kind of like VFX, lots of splatter, there's those who are happy with that. And I think those of you who seek that type of movie are going to be happy with this movie, because I think there's lots of it. And this movie really revels in it. And it's a lot of fun in many ways because of that. It introduces many elements. There's, like I say, a whole host of different kind of side characters. There's multiple kind of serial killers in this movie. And you know, they have some interesting kind of elements to it. It never really goes into massive detail of anyone other than our main guy, but it hints to certainly some interesting kind of characters and some interesting kind of like things that could have been explored. So it just has that kind of that surface level to it. The practical effects are kind of fun. I've mentioned the band Gore a few times, and some of you may not know what that is, but for those of you who do, you'll kind of know what I mean with that sort of aesthetic. It's not trying to be a realistic, harrowing gore film. It's trying to be very over the top, very bizarre, you know, kind of strange movie in many ways, but a kind of comic book in some aspects. So the kind of the aesthetic of this movie and the energy, this kind of manic energy that this movie has, is kind of comic bookish, if that makes sense. So a lot of this will be down to taste. I mean, the acting, for example, isn't, if you're looking at it objectively, isn't strong, but it's not, I don't think it is necessarily meant to be. It suits this kind of style of movie. And I don't think anyone's watching this movie for solid performances. It's meant to be a bizarre, over-the-top, you know, kind of world, so to speak. And I think it kind of really shows like the worst of humanity, if that makes it, this cesspool in this particular kind of city. And yeah, it has that sort of comic book vibe. What doesn't work, I mean, like I said, a lot of this is going to be down to taste. I think if we have to put an objective hat onto this film, I don't think it's as kind of like watchable as the early Peter Jackson movies that I've mentioned, which to me, even though they were as over the top as this one, I think the characters had a little bit more heart to them, and a little bit more, it kind of drew you in a little bit more. I think primarily because our primary character in this one is a serial killer, and you know, he's going around killing people. We don't really have a kind of someone to catch on to, if that makes sense. And even when we do have these scenes of this guy, I never really feel like, you know, we kind of connect to him in a way. So you're watching this and it's lots of fun and chaos going on screen, but you're never really kind of like taken on the ride with the character, if that makes sense. And that is the difference between this movie and, I say, you know, movies that came from the early days of Peter Jackson. Because I still feel, even though that was equally as kind of grotesque, you still went along with the characters. You still kind of went in with their journey. Even though those characters were over the top, you still kind of rooted for them. You still kind of were on side. This one doesn't have that. And as I've kind of said as well, it's actually a relatively basic story, but I think there are elements here that could have been fleshed out that weren't. The whole reason why this guy is going on this killing rampage is because of smoking, but I didn't really kind of fully get why that was, if that makes sense. And this movie isn't trying to be deep. It's not trying to be a film which is giving you thoughtful kind of character pieces. But even so, I was kind of like, so he used to work for a cigarette company, and his mum died. I'm assuming of like lung cancer. They mention it's cancer, but they don't specifically say lung cancer. And it's like, that's all you get. And like, it's kind of like, that's the motivation. And then we have all these little side characters that are introduced. We get a couple of punk girls which seem to be cannibals. We get this other woman who seems to be a kind of a serial killer and just collecting body parts on little jars. And it's just like, okay, and we get a guy who you have seen from one of the Human Centipede movies, and he's like shagging a chicken. So we get all of these like little things that have like little character moments. I think they're kind of interesting, and you kind of want to know more in a way, but there's so many of it, and this movie has so much going on. It's never really just kind of like, it's just there as a sort of little nugget, Billy, but it doesn't do much with it, if that makes sense. I think this movie could have been a little bit more focused, if I'm honest, to make it the narrative. I'm not saying it has to have a full-on kind of like character work and arc and that sort of thing, but I think the narrative is just a little bit too wild. We're introduced to this kind of like biker gang who seemingly are like the mafia of this kind of the city, who want to kind of control the killing, but they're never kind of like seen or referenced again. So it has all these elements here that I just feel there's too many kind of like strings hanging and it could have just been a little bit tighter in regards to kind of story-wise. For me, at least, I just think it seemed a little unfocused to me. It's kind of what I'm getting at. It's a film which is hard to rate because generally I would say this is going to be very much a taste issue. It's not a lot of kind of like meat on the bones in regards to anything other than a visual spectacle of bizarre chaos and debauchery. That is going to be enough for some of you. Some of you will just like the chaos on screen, and it's done with a gleeful, wicked smile, and I think that is entertaining to a degree. But for others, I have to be honest with you, I found this movie just a little bit boring in a way, because it's just kind of stuff on screen. It's just like candy on screen, but you can't add loads of candy, because candy on its own ends up just make you sick. You want a little bit of savoury in there as well. So it's a 5 out of 10. Hard film to judge. You're either going to like this type of film or you're not. But to look at it critically, it's kind of difficult. It's a 5 out of 10 because I think it had the potential to be an interesting kind of splatterfest, but it ends up being somewhat of a shallow one. Anyway, that's my review of this one. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.